Well, hello again, or in case you just tuned in, hi, I'm Marco, and I'm going to give you a quick run through TeamCity Cloud so that hopefully you'll have a successful green build of your project in a couple of minutes with TeamCity Cloud. For that, you need two things, and you can actually follow along because I don't like slides. Everything I'm going to do is going to be live coding / live configuration, and essentially everything I do, you can also just repeat and do yourself. So jetbrains.com/teamcity/cloud, and then you also need a repository. I prepared a Java Maven repository, and it doesn't matter too much if you're not comfortable with Java, because I just want you to get an up and running build. So copy my repository for now, and then later on you can just repeat the same steps with your repository and different languages, Node.js, C#, Python, whatever have you. Okay, so I copied my repository URL. I'm going back to the TeamCity Cloud homepage. Obviously, you could scroll down, tons of information, pricing and whatnot. For now, I only want you to put your email into the email box. So I'm just going to put my email here. I want to start building for free. I'm getting an email now, which I'll just quickly get, right? Click the activation link. Now there's a registration page, which is the most boring part of this demo here. My company name. Yes, I have read the license agreement very carefully, right? And now I can choose my TeamCity domain. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose 15 years, TeamCity.com, proceed. And now it's going to take a while. What's going to happen in the background is that we actually spin up an entirely new TeamCity server for you in the cloud, or more specifically in AWS. A TeamCity server is basically the TeamCity server software, which is going to be deployed in a Docker container in Amazon EC2 in the Ireland region by default. And then also there is an RDS instance, which is being spun up. So you have an isolated database where all your data actually goes into. And as you can see, it says, well, it said it can take up to 2 minutes, but that was actually pretty quick. So all of what I just mentioned happened in the background, and you're able to just, join TeamCity Cloud now, which I'm going to do. I could log in with a username and password, or for the first time, I'm just going to choose login with GitHub. Right, I'm going to choose marco@jetbrains.com, put in my password. I'm just going to sign in, put in my verification code, and I'm being redirected straight to my TeamCity instance. Now again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully read the agreement here. Even scrolling down takes some time, but I do agree, right? And then I just have to wait a couple of seconds more, hopefully, and I will be prompted with my fresh 2-week TeamCity trial account. Now, what you'll see at the beginning is the TeamCity overview page, where you don't have any projects yet. So there's nothing too exciting going on here. And what we're going to do now is just create a new project. So just click the button here, and you'll be prompted with the Create Project Wizard. There's a couple of choices that you can see here from GitHub.com, from Bitbucket Cloud, GitLab.com. And because we just logged in with GitHub, we actually get a nice little drop down of all my GitHub repositories down here. But if you haven't logged in with GitHub or just did a manual registration, you can always just as a default go with create a project from a repository URL. In here, what you're going to do is you're going to paste in your repository URL. You don't need a username or password in this case because it's a public repository. I'm going to click proceed. And what happens now is that TeamCity tries to connect to my repository and does the first checks. Well, does the repository exist? Was the username, password, or the access token correct? And as you can see, that worked. And now TeamCity says, well, I'm going to create a project with the same name as your repository. The URL is going to be the GitHub URL. Default branch means that TeamCity is going to poll your default branch every 60 seconds by default for changes. So that's the main branch. And that is proper git speak ref heads main for that. And there's also a branch specification, which says not only do you want to poll the main branch, but actually every other branch as well. So if you have feature branches, production branches, staging, whatever, all of these would get polled for changes rather, and builds are being triggered. Now I skipped one field here, the build configuration name. And build configuration, if you come from other tools, every project needs to do something, and that something is a job. In TeamCity, jobs are called build configurations. So we also need a build configuration. At the moment it's called build because it's just, gonna build our entire project. I'm gonna click proceed again, and we're almost done here. There's just one last step. And again, it shows a bit of how TeamCity tries to be smart, because now TeamCity scans your repository and sees, well, your repository, actually let me just open it up in GitHub again, has a POM.xml file. POM.xml file is always a signal for it being a Maven project, a Java Maven project. So TeamCity says, hey, it looks like I found a POM.xml file. Why don't you just want to run Maven clean test, which compiles your code and which tests your code? And all of that is going to be bundled in a so-called build step. So every build configuration / job in TeamCity needs build steps. One of these build steps is a Maven build step. And yeah, why not? Let's go with that. So I'm just going to hit use selected. I'm going to get a pop-up here. I got it. I can run the first build. Let's actually run a build and see what happens now. Because I'm now being redirected to our home page again. As you can see, there's now a project. Here is our build configuration / job. You can see there's a build queued, right, waiting for starting agent. There's already a build log. You can see something is happening on a TeamCity server. But actually, the interesting thing is the build doesn't really happen on the TeamCity server. It happens on a so-called agent. You can see agent Linux small here. Now, where does the agent come from? And while the build is running, let's talk a bit about the TeamCity agents. Now, you'll find a tab up here, which is called, unsurprisingly, agents. An agent is any machine. It could be running in the cloud. It could be running on your machine, where the TeamCity build agent is actually installed and up and running. And the builds always happen on these agents. They don't happen on the TeamCity server. The TeamCity server is just a UI, and the agents run the builds, and they send the log files and everything, the build results, back to the server for you to display. Now, by default, what's going to happen in the cloud, that we spawn up these build agents for you dynamically. So you want to run a build, and we just spawn up a build agent for you. If you have a look at the default section here, you can see there's different types of build agents. So a Linux medium build agent, Linux small agent, a Windows medium agent. When you click Linux small, you'll actually see there was a running agent instance a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes ago. It has already been stopped because they get actually spawned up and then killed after a build. So you always have a clean agent, right? And when you go back to the TeamCity Cloud homepage and scroll down a bit, you'll also find that these agents have obviously different characteristics. They have different CPUs, they have different RAM, and they also have a different pricing model. But this is just one way. So for example, we manage the agents for you, you spawn them up, you just tell us what agent you want. And by default, we're just gonna spawn up the cheapest choice, so Linux small for you, but you can also change that, obviously, for your builds. And then what I also would like to show at the end is how you run your builds locally, or rather you have your agents running locally on your machine, or my laptop in this case, and connect to your cloud instance. But not so quick. First of all, let's go back to the TeamCity server projects. Let's have a look at the build. As you can see, the build was successful. Build number 1, the main branch was built. 3 tests have passed. That was the Linux small agent. It took 37 seconds to build 2 minutes ago. Great. Let me show you some concepts of TeamCity. I'll open up the build. So again, you'll see here's an overview page, just repeating what you just saw on the main page, where you had all the other builds. Actually, let me just run another build so that you'll see here a nice table of all your builds. But when you have a specific look at one build, then you'll have the changes tab, which shows you actually, for now, it just shows the revision that got built. But in fact, if someone pushed a change now, or pushed a commit now, you would see the push and the commits that triggered the build here under the Changes tab. You'll have the build log, obviously, so you'll see what happened. It's a smart build log. You can even search inside the build log pretty quickly. So if you put in Maven, you'll find all these. You don't even have to download the build log anymore because the search actually works pretty performantly. A couple of other tabs, but what I want to highlight is the Tests tab. Test support is pretty cool in TeamCity. What you'll see is that, well, for this build, there were 3 tests. They were all successful, all green. There was a syntax checker unit test, which took 46 milliseconds. There was another unit test, which just took 2 milliseconds. There was a slow web service test, which took 5 seconds, right? You see the order in which the test ran. And also, you always have a test history. When you look at a specific test, like the fast test here, we just triggered 2 builds. And you can see that, well, it took 40 milliseconds in build number 2. It took 46 milliseconds in build number 1. You also have that here in a nice little graph, which just for 2 build runs isn't too exciting. But essentially, you have a pretty good overview of what your tests did in the past, how they behaved. You have graphics. You even have flaky test detection, where TeamCity can tell you, hey, this test is starting to fail, even though there were no changes pushed. So all of that sort of stuff you can explore in TeamCity. Right, now we have that. That was the basic intro into, well, how to get your first build up and running with a ton of, let's say, TeamCity magic, because we just put in our GitHub URL, and then TeamCity auto detected everything it wanted to do for you. But what we're now going to do is, I just want to give you, some of the core main TeamCity concepts so you're not entirely lost when you're trying this yourself or when you're using other programming languages for that matter. Go to your project, edit the project, and what we're going to do is we're just going to have a look at the build configurations here, the one that TeamCity created for us. And what we're going to do is we're just going to delete the build configuration, because now everything that TeamCity did for us, we're going to do manually and learn a couple of things along the way. So let's create a new build configuration. We'll just create a manual build configuration. We're going to call it build again, right? That is pretty similar to what we did before. And then here you'll find now that our build/job is opened up. TeamCity wants us to have a look at the version control settings first. It says, please attach an existing VCS root. VCS root is TeamCity speak for your repository. And what you want to do is your project has that one repository at the moment. Note, there can be many repositories attached to a specific project, hence the drop-down list. But for here, we just want to go with our one repository. Then TeamCity is trying to do the same, build step magic again. But we don't want to do that. We want to configure that manually. So I'm going to click this link here, right? And now what you can see is I'm here in the build step section. TeamCity tells me add a new build step. That's fine. What specific runner should that be? And basically a runner is every technology in TeamCity that we support. We have a specific build step runner for it. So for example, if you want to build something .NET-y, you're going to go with .NET. If you want to do something with Docker, choose a Docker runner. If you want to build a Gradle project, go with the Gradle runner. Maven runner. Node.js runner. Python, whatever. So you can see that for every technology/framework, we have specific runners. And we're going to go with the Maven runner for now. The Maven runner is going to take a second, and it's going to prompt us with a couple of options that only make sense in the Maven context. So, for example, what are the Maven goals we want to execute? Before or earlier, we executed Maven clean test. Now let's execute Maven clean package, which takes our source code, compiles it, runs tests, and also creates a package, a jar file, which I then can later on, deploy somewhere else. Or even, wrap inside a Docker container, upload it to a registry, whatever you want. Path to POM XML file. Remember, it's in our repository. But in case you missed that, you have many smart icons in TeamCity. One of these smart icons is here on the right side. When you click it, you actually get a browser through your Git repository, and then you can simply, click through all the folders and find your pom.xml file. I'm just going to go with the pom.xml file in the root. What you also can do, and that's a pretty cool feature, run the step within a Docker container. If for whatever reason you're unsure of what is installed on the build agent, and by default on our cloud build agents we install pretty much everything that you might want to build. But imagine you have a Docker container, you want to run Maven clean package inside a Docker container. Like, for example, take the latest Maven image from Docker Hub and run it inside there. Easy, you just put in the image coordinates and that's it. You could even say, well, Linux or Windows image, whatever, a couple of other options, but for now, this is all you need to do. When you have a look at the advanced options, you'll see you even have more options. Do you want to run with a specific Maven version, a specific JDK, incremental building, Maven specific options? So everything that has to do with Maven. And these options, obviously, if you wanted to run command line scripts or shell scripts, you will find that the runners can configure your build tool or whatever you're trying to do with any option you'd ever like to use. Right, so I'm going to click Save. That looks good. So what we did is two things so far. Repository, we also have our build step. And then I'm going to give you just something on the way. What you want to do is not failure conditions, but triggers. Triggers is a big concept in TeamCity because at the moment you have your project set up, but no builds are being triggered automatically. You can change that by adding a trigger like a VCS trigger. If you want to run builds when someone pushes changes to your repository, you have a schedule trigger if you wanted to run builds on a cron basis, for example, right? Just to show you the schedule trigger tells you when, daily, 12 o'clock, whatever. What I want to do is just go with the VCS trigger at the moment. There's even more advanced ones like build the project whenever a dependency in a pom.xml file changes. So have a look at those, right? But for now, just any build in any branch, any commit in any branch should trigger a build. We're just going to go with that. And last but not least, before we just run a build and hopefully everything is still working, think about what I mentioned earlier, that the build happens on the TeamCity build agent. And these machines are being booted up and they're being killed again after the build. Now I'm trying to build a jar file, but the jar file is going to be gone after the build agent is being killed or has been killed. And we need a way to transfer the jar file to the TeamCity server so it gets a hold of it. And then the TeamCity server can take the jar file and give it a different job later on that wants to deploy the jar file, for example. And in TeamCity, you do that by saying my build has an artifact, a so-called artifact. In JavaSpeak, or in MavenSpeak rather, the jar file will end up in the target folder. And I just want TeamCity to take any jar file in the target folder and upload it to the TeamCity server so we get a hold of it. Right. These are the main concepts. You'll need to understand repositories or version control settings, build steps for your languages, triggers, and also artifacts if you want. All right, now that is enough. Let's actually trigger just another build. Wait a couple of seconds, and by now you should be actually used to it. As you can see, the build has been queued. You can see the build, we're waiting for a starting agent. And hopefully that will lead to a green build again in a second. While that build is running, let me show you one final concept. I told you at the beginning, there is the possibility of running your own build agents locally or in your data center, wherever, and connecting them to your TeamCity Cloud instance. If you want to do that, you will go to the Agents tab, then click Install Agent and download an agent. By default, you could just go with the full zip distribution file, put it somewhere on your PC, and unpack it. And then the agent needs to run and it needs to connect to your TeamCity Cloud server. And for that, you need a couple of settings, also an authentication token. So use that menu again, use authentication token, download config, give your agent a name, so 15-year agent, for example. And I'm just generating and downloading such a file. Right. Now, let me show you what to do with that. I'm going to open up my downloads folder. I have my build agent properties. I'm just going to quickly take that with me. Go inside the build agent directory, which I already downloaded and unzipped, conf folder. I'm just going to copy my file in here. So here's my properties file, right? And then I'm just going to open up a command line. cd downloads, build agent, build cd downloads, cd build agent full, cd bin, I think it is. Let me just double check. Agent bat start. Now what's going to happen is that my agent locally is booting up. It says looking for installed Java. The Java executable was found, JDK 11. And now actually the build agent is booting up, and hopefully it's going to connect to my TeamCity Cloud instance in a second. Right. Meanwhile, while that's happening, let's have a look. You can already see there's now the agent is here, but it's still red because it hasn't yet connected, which it hopefully will do in a second. And meanwhile, while that's happening, let's go back to the project. You can see that the build is running. Let's see what it does. Right. Step 1 is still executing. Maven step number 1 is running. You can actually have a look at it. You can see that, well, there was a Docker container running step within a Docker container, Maven latest, that worked. So what actually happened is that TeamCity downloaded Docker image and ran the Docker container successfully. You can see there's a ton of dependencies being downloaded here for the first time, right? And let me just go back to the overview page. And now I guess there's a quick race going on between what is going to be faster. Is my build finishing faster here, or is my cloud agent connecting faster? Tests have passed 3 publishing artifacts. That looks pretty good. So it's coming to a close in a second, right? Build is done. As you can see, the build is running perfectly, just like it did before. Tests have passed, 3 different tests. The only thing I want to highlight here is that we can now have a look at this artifacts icon over here. And you can see there's suddenly an artifact which I can download or even browse inside these magic icons again. That's my jar file, which came out of my Maven build step that we created by running Maven clean package. And now I can actually see it here, right? My TeamCity build agent is popping up and doing an upgrade, it seems. Hopefully it's going to be done in a second once I click that tab over here. But just to finish off, you'll have your artifact here, so you can download it. With a jar file, it might not make too much sense, but a prime example, for example, would be log files. You just get all the log files from your build agents, put them here, or even videos. If you run tests with headless browsers, you can get your test videos, your browser videos, just transferred here, and you'll see if a test failed, you'll see the video, why it failed and whatnot. Pretty super cool. But also, if you want to run build pipelines later on, you need these artifacts so that the TeamCity server can send them to other build agents later on down in the pipeline. Right. This should all be clear. Let's see what our agent does. Our agent is still disconnected. And let's do a tiny time warp and hope it will finish in a second. Right, whoops, back again. That happened pretty quick. As you can see, the agent is now connected. You can even see the operating system that I'm running on, the CPU rank, the host name, all that sort of stuff. And if I now start running builds, they will use my locally connected TeamCity agent, even though there's a different licensing. Have a look at the TeamCity Cloud homepage, because with these local running agents, it's all about how many of parallel builds can you actually run. Right. But to sum things up, to not confuse you too much more with many more concepts, we learned a couple of things. You can get started with TeamCity Cloud pretty easily. Just put in your repository URL, let TeamCity do its magic, scan your repository, and then just say yes, essentially. Other than that, just remember there's a couple of concepts of build configurations/jobs in TeamCity. You need build steps with these runner types, Maven, Java, Python, whatever have you. You have these triggers. You also have the artifacts. And that should get you started with pretty much any project you would like to build in TeamCity. Now it's your choice. Give it a try. Try it out. Let us know what you think. But in any case, I think that's enough for now, and it's time to watch some more other talks, or if you're watching this later, then I'm just gonna say bye.